So the internal ear, also known as inner ear, also known as labyrinth, sometimes also known as bony labyrinth. But this internal ear or inner ear, it is made up of the bony part known as bony labyrinth or the osseous labyrinth, and the inner part is the membranous labyrinth, which is filled by a fluid known as endolymph, and the part or the potential space between the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth, the inner part of the bony labyrinth, which is covered by the periosteum, and this outer part of the membranous labyrinth, this is filled by other special fluid known as perilymph. So first of all, the structure of the inner ear or the labyrinth. The inner ear, basically the inner ear, it is a single organ. When we talk about the ear, it is having external ear, the middle ear or the tympanum, and the inner ear. But independently, it is having three different parts: the anteriormost, the middle, and the posteriormost part, and all three parts are having different functions. The anteriormost part is concerned with the auditory function, and the posterior part, that is the vestibule and the semicircular canals, are related to the balance and equilibrium. So when we talk about the general structure, so this very beautiful structure, this is the anterior part, this is the posterior part, so this is the anteriormost part, the middlemost part, and the posteriormost parts. This part, which is lying anteriormost, this is known as cochlea. So this is the cochlea. This cochlear part is related to the auditory or hearing function. So this is the auditory part. The porch-like part, this white part behind the cochlea and anterior to these mysterious canals is the vestibule. Some dilated part like porch like parking of a car or something like the store of the house, which is spacious and more wide, is known as vestibule. So this middle part is the vestibule. So the anteriormost part is the cochlea, and it resembles the shell of the common snail. So shape of the common snail. The word cochlea is derived from the common snail. So this is having some canals or rings. So it is having 2 and 3/4 canals, the cochlea. This is the vestibule, and the posterior superior part is known as the semicircular canals. These are the semicircular canals. There are 3 semicircular canals: the anterior or superior, the posterior canal, and this is the lateral or the horizontal semicircular canal. Although these canals are not semicircular, these all 3 canals, which are having different length but almost equal diameter, arranged at right angle to each other and forming 2/3 part of a ring. So these are forming the 2/3 part of a ring and having a dilated part. This dilation is known as the ampulla of the canal. The outer part of this inner ear is formed by the bone, the petrous part of the temporal bone. So the petrous temporal bone. This is the hardest and most dense part, bony part of the body, and looks like a rock. So word petrous is used for this part, the petrous temporal bone, and in the petrous temporal bone there are a chain of cavities and canals. There is a chain of the cavities and the canals, which is having cavities and which is having interconnecting canals. So the word labyrinth is used for the inner ear because it is having the bony cavities and interconnecting bony canals. So word labyrinth is used for this inner ear. So word labyrinth is used for this inner ear, which is having the cavities and canals. This outer part is known as the bony labyrinth, which is accommodating the membranous labyrinth. So there is bony, also known as osseous, and the membranous labyrinth. labyrinth. So there is bony labyrinth and there is membranous labyrinth. The membranous labyrinth is simply, it is also having sacs and the interconnecting canals. So the osseous or bony labyrinth is having sacs or cavities and interconnecting canals. The bony labyrinth, which is accommodated by this bony labyrinth, is having sacs and canals which are connecting each other. The part beneath the bony labyrinth and outside the membranous labyrinth, it is having a fluid. It is filled by a fluid. This part is having a fluid. The fluid is known as, yes, it is perilymph. It is perilymph, and the sacs and canals of the membranous labyrinth, this part is filled by other fluid. That fluid is known as the endolymph. So this is the endolymph. This is the endolymph. So there are two types of fluids. One is outside the bony labyrinth, outside the membranous labyrinth, but inside the bony labyrinth is the perilymph, and other is inside the bony labyrinth is the endolymph. This fluid, the perilymph, this is rich in sodium and calcium, but it is having poor concentration of the potassium. So it is having sodium and calcium, rich in sodium and rich in calcium, but it is having the potassium in low concentration. These are high and this is low in concentration, and it almost resembles the concentration of the ECF, the extracellular fluid. So the concentration of ions is almost equal to the extracellular fluid, ECF. No need to describe the ECF. Simply the fluid between the cells or in the intercellular space is the ECF, the extracellular fluid. On the other hand, the other fluid is the endolymph. This fluid is rich in potassium, yes, almost equal to the cytosol or the intracellular fluid. So it is rich in potassium. But having poor concentration of sodium and the calcium. It is having poor concentration of the sodium and the calcium. I am putting both outside the circle because it is poor in sodium and the calcium. On the other hand, this is poor in potassium. This perilymph is having higher concentration of the sodium and calcium. This is having poor concentration of the sodium and calcium. Why this gradient of these ions and gradient of the voltage or electric current is there in this labyrinth, and what is the significance of this gradient of ions and the voltage? Yes, it is having functional drive. It is having functional drive and help the hair cells to convert the sense of the hearing, that is the auditory, and sense of equilibrium into the action potential. So there is positive 80 millivolt gradient inside the endolymph. So there is plus 80 millivolt positive voltage inside the membranous labyrinth, and this difference of the voltage or this difference in the concentration of the ions help the labyrinth to convert the sense of hearing and sense of equilibrium in the action potential, and it acts as a functional drive for the mechanotransducer, the mechanism which is responsible for converting the all senses in action potential is known as transduction. So in this case there is mechanotransduction, the word mechanotransduction. This mechanotransduction is carried by this voltage difference in the perilymph and in the endolymph. Now I will talk in detail one by one the vestibule, the cochlea and the semicircular canals. First of all, I will talk about the simplest one, the very simple or simplest in all three, the vestibule. The vestibule, the lateral part of the vestibule is bounded by the tympanic membrane, which is having an opening in the vestibular part. So first of all, I will talk about the lateral wall of the vestibule. There is an opening, oval shaped opening, not round. There is an opening in the tympanic membrane, and this opening is formed by the vestibule and this is formed by the vestibule, and this opening, the shape of opening is oval. So this is known as oval window. Yes, this is fenestra vestibuli. This is the fenestra vestibuli, and this oval window or fenestra vestibuli is occupied by the footplate of the stapes. So this is occupied by the footplate of the stapes. This is the footplate of the stapes. The stapes is also having the posterior, the anterior which is smaller, and the posterior crus or the limbs, which are held together by the short neck and the concave head. This head is accommodating the lentiform nodule of the long process of the incus and forming a ball and socket joint, which is a synovial joint. So this fenestra vestibuli or oval window is closed by the foot plate of the stapes. When we see the relations of this vestibule, the lateral part is having tympanic membrane, the posterior part is having the semicircular canals, the posterior superior part is having semicircular canals, and this anterior part is having the cochlea. Looks like the shell of common snail. When we remove this lateral wall, medially this is having the internal acoustic meatus. When we remove this lateral wall, what we see, there is in the medial wall. When we remove the lateral wall of this, we can see here a crest. This crest is known as vestibular crest. The anterior superior part of this crest is modified as pyramid. So this is the pyramid. And the lowermost part is bifurcated to bound a recess. This recess is known as cochlear recess. Now there are two more recesses. One is anterior to the vertebral crest, the vestibular crest. This is known as the vestibular crest. So one is anterior to this vestibular crest and other is the posterior to this vestibular crest. This part forming a spherical like sphere. This is the spherical recess. And posterior to this is the elliptical recess. So again, there is a crest. This crest is known as vestibular crest. The lowermost part of the vestibular crest is diverging to surround a recess. This recess is known as the cochlear recess. The anteriormost part and superior part of this vestibular recess is known as the pyramid. The anterior part is the spherical recess and the posterior part is known as the elliptical recess. This recess, beneath this recess, there is saccule. The saccule is beneath this. This saccule, and this saccule is pierced by very small or teeny holes. These teeny plates are known as macula cribrosa media. It is having very tiny openings or sieve-like structure. This is known as macula, cribrosa, media. So this is the macula, cribrosa, media, and these tiny holes of this macula, cribrosa, media are having tiny nerve fibers of the vestibular nerve. Again, spherical recess is having the saccule, and it is having very tiny sieve-like openings known as macula, cribrosa, media, and these small holes are having tiny nerve fibers of the vestibular nerve. This part, the pyramid and the elliptical recess, are also pierced by some nerve fibers of the vestibular nerve, and these small holes or the sieve-like structure is known as macula cribrosa superioris or superior. Macula cribrosa superior. This is the macula cribrosa superior, and these are also having tiny nerve fibers of the vestibular nerve. Now, this pyramidal part is having tiny nerve fibers for the utricle, which is occupying the elliptical recess. So this is having the tiny fibers for the utricle. And the nerve fibers which are piercing this elliptical recess are connecting the vestibular nerve to the ampulla of the anterior and posterior semicircular canals. Again, tiny nerve fibers are piercing the part of the macula cribrosa superior of the pyramid, are connecting the utricles, and tiny fibers which are piercing the elliptical recess are connecting the ampulla of the superior or anterior and the part of the posterior and some part of the ampulla of the lateral semicircular canals. So this is the medial wall of the vestibule. Anterior wall is connected to the cochlea by a big opening of the scala vestibuli, and the posterior part is having 5 openings of the superior, posterior and the lateral semicircular canals. Now, after a short break, I will talk about first the semicircular canals, and in next lecture the cochlea.